Hello, guys. Welcome to today's live. Today, we are going to be talking about autism and food, picky eating, and we have a guest. She is the Autism Dietitian on Instagram, Brittyn Coleman. And once she joins, I will add her to the conversation. I always forget how to do this, so let's give me a little bit of a... Hopefully I did that right. So definitely send in any questions you have.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Doing well, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on our live today. It's going to be so exciting because I love this topic so much.
There's so much to talk about when it comes to picky eating, and I feel like not enough people really cover how important it is to address it. So thanks for having me. I'm excited for the conversation.
Yeah, so everyone who's joining, this is Brittyn Coleman, she's the Autism Dietitian on Instagram. I'll put a story after the live with all your information in there. I'm really excited about today. I have so many of my parents that follow me ask me questions about food and, autism and picky eating and all of that. So I'm so glad to have guests come on my page to give that information. And
it's such a good resource too for you to be able to connect other families to different resources. So I know that you're like a huge blessing to the families who follow you. So
and congratulations, by the way, on your news.
Thanks. Thank you. We're super excited. And remind me where in Australia you are.
So I'm in Newcastle, which is near Sydney. Everyone knows Sydney, I think.
Yeah, very close friends are from Canberra, and so I know very little like Australian geography, but I know a little.
Yeah, we're about, I think, around like 4 or 5 hours from there. So yeah.
Cool. Awesome.
While everyone's joining, did you want to give a quick intro about yourself and the Autism Dietitian? Yeah.
Definitely. So my name is Brittyn Coleman. I'm a registered dietitian and I specialize in kids on the autism spectrum. Basically, it's just my goal to help families understand ways to support their kids in eating so that we can expand their diet in a way that works with their sensory needs and not against them, because a lot of those typical picky eating approaches really just they're not for kids on the spectrum. They just don't honor their needs and preferences, and so it's my goal to help families learn how to do that. And at the end of the day, what I want for kids is just to help them feel good and to help them feel their best. And when they feel their best, they can do their best in school and therapies and in life. And that's what we're all about. So that's my goal for the families I work with and how I really approach picky eating for autism.
That's awesome. It's so awesome to hear you say that about the sensory side of it, because I think, and I'll go into it, when we start these lives every week, I just do a few like debunking of myths just to start off the live. And one of the big ones that we hear as parents is, like just don't, if they don't eat, what was I trying to say? I should read it off here.
If they don't eat, just like expect that, or like stop feeding them those unhealthy foods and like just expect them to eat is what I'm assuming. Yeah.
If eventually they'll eat if you put something healthy in front of them and you stop all of their favorite snacks. So yeah, what do you have to say?
It kills me. And it's funny, it was like perfect timing because I just posted about this yesterday or the day before. But it's so unfortunate because it's one of the most common picky eating suggestions that people will have for kids and say, oh, just stop feeding them X, Y, and Z, and they'll start eating something when they're hungry enough. I'm like, that's not true. Maybe some kids, but honestly, I don't like it for any kids on or off the spectrum. But especially for kids who are on the spectrum, it just is not a good approach. It just doesn't. Their sensory needs aren't going to go away if they're hungry. In fact, they're going to be even heightened. When you're hungry or you're hangry, those sensory input and overwhelm and overstimulation is just going to go through the roof. And so it just ends up backfiring and just really not working for families, and then they cave and they feel this extreme guilt. And I never want a family to feel guilt for trying to help their child feel healthy, and unfortunately it's just really bad advice at the end of the day.
Yeah, I remember back to like Jacob went through a really, really picky period. And I remember thinking when people would say that to me, I remember thinking like, oh, am I doing something wrong? Am I like, should I be like restricting him? And, it really makes you rethink your parenting ways. And then, you have to like really like push through that and go, no, like he literally won't eat anything if I don't put that on his plate. Like and it's very frustrating that, vulnerable parents can listen to that advice and feel so much guilt about it. So yeah, I'm glad that you're saying that as a dietitian.
I love validating parents too. I'm like, your child best. Most parents will say, I know that that's not going to work for my child, but you might also feel so desperate that you want them to eat something healthy. You're like, I'll try anything. And so I love being able to validate parents. I'm like, no, you're right. Like, you're right. That's not going to work for your child, and let's find a different way that will. So I'm sorry that you were recommended that too, but it sounds like you followed your gut and you were able to realize that that wasn't a good fit for them.
Yeah, I think it's mostly, I would say mostly it's the older generation. And I think that's how we were raised. Well, eat everything on your plate and, unless, all of that. So I think, it does come from everyone, but that generation that, it's just how we're raised, I guess.
Yeah, like an empty plate is a healthy plate, like that whole thing. And it teaches you also to override your hunger cues. There's so many things that just go against that. And I'm glad that we are having this conversation because
yeah. So everyone who's watching, feel free to ask questions any time during the live, but we do have some pre-asked questions I asked my followers last week. So we might head into those questions and then, yeah, we'll see how we go. So question number 1 was, why are autistic kids more prone to be fussy eaters?
Yeah, so it is very common for kids to be really limited in the foods that they'll eat if they're on the autism spectrum. The biggest reason really is because of sensory sensitivity or sensory overwhelm. And so just like kids can get overwhelmed from any other sense or overstimulated throughout the day, eating is one of those experiences that we have as humans that is so sensory rich. I mean, we have every sense happening at the same time. We smell, taste, we're hearing, we're looking. It just happens all at once. And for a child who may be already feeling overstimulating themselves even more with this completely new food that looks like a different color, has a different texture, smells weird, all of these things, it's not a very fun experience for them or very pleasurable experience. And which is unfortunate because I love to eat. Many people love to eat, but when you get to the root of it from a sensory experience, I can completely understand why it's not very pleasurable for a child who's overstimulated. So that's a huge reason, and that's why I say I want to work with their sensory needs and sensory preferences so that we can have success and not work against them, like forcing them to eat something that isn't within their wheelhouse. We start close to them, start where they feel comfortable, and we gradually expand and help them expand that way. So that's a huge reason, but it's also common to have gut issues for kids on the spectrum too, which can make eating really uncomfortable. So maybe they're constipated or have gas or diarrhea or whatever it may be, and that can make picky eating worse, which can make gut issues worse and then make picky eating worse. It's just like this huge cycle. So that's a big reason. Another one is like routine, and a change in routine in eating can be a huge thing to get in the way of eating. Like if you're eating out, if you are changing up your school routine, or if things are different every single time you sit down for a meal, which is easy. There's so many variables, but that can also be something that can feel stressful for a child if their routine is very unregulated, dysregulated as well.
I know that Jacob, he has his certain foods that he has at particular times of the day. So I think that in that routine space, he's very much not lenient a little bit with that. So I think I do try and like adjust the routine a little bit with him, just get a bit more flexible, but he is very routine based in all aspects of his life. So
That's actually a really good point too, because you want him to have that flexibility as well. There's certain foods that kids will eat at certain times of the day. They'll only eat it in certain locations. Like they'll eat a PB&J at school, but they would never touch it at home. So there are different ways that we can set up, even just like a visual routine or visual communication, that we can help them kind of ease into eating and learn to eat things in different situations. So completely hear you in what you're saying. I think that's a really good thing to think about.
Mate, I might go with one of the questions that have popped up here. Is there any ones that you want to answer?
Yeah, well, I saw someone asking about how do you manage gut health. There's two questions that kind of go hand in hand. One say, what can I do for my son who's constipated? He drinks a liter of water a day, so that's awesome. But it also says, how do you manage gut health for kids who are picky eaters? So really thinking of both of those. I mean, it's hard when you have a child who has a limited diet and they also have constipation. Now, the two biggest things that we're thinking about with constipation, we think about fiber and water. Those are our first two things that we want to look at. There are so many other pieces that fit in, but if we're missing the two big, hallmarks to healthy bowel movements, that's a problem. So a lot of times kids who are picky eaters, they don't get enough fiber and they don't get enough water. And so we have to start there and then look at all the other, piece it all together. So I actually have a course on constipation, and what I do is talk families through, okay, what diet do we want kids to have? But if your child's a picky eater, how are we going to get there? And so I have another course on picky eating that helps us learn. So usually with constipation, if the root of the problem would be picky eating, I say start there. Let's start with picky eating. Let's expand the diet so that we can have healthier bowel movements, and then we usually see quicker progress with picky eating too. Yeah. If a child isn't a picky eater, if we track what they're eating and they're getting all their fiber, they're drinking a lot of water, and we just can't figure out, okay, those two needs are met, what else is going on? That's when we start digging. We start understanding there must be something going on. Is it a fear around going to the bathroom? Is it muscle tone that could be getting in the way? Is it a lack of physical activity? There's so many things that are often missed that that's when we start digging into those once our basic needs are met.
Is that when you sort of like direct to an occupational therapist? Yeah, okay.
That's a great, exactly, yes. So some occupational therapists will also work in like pediatric pelvic floor health, which looks a lot different than, if you were to do pelvic floor therapy as an adult. Pediatric pelvic floor therapy is actually it's non-invasive, and it can help with continence, but it can also help with like healthy bowel movements too. And so not every occupational therapist will be a pelvic floor therapist too, but if constipation is the biggest issue, I would recommend trying to find somebody who also works in that area. Sometimes OTs also do feeding therapy, and so it's great if you can find someone who does both. That's probably a unicorn, but they can be incredibly helpful. So can speech therapists. I mean, I refer out all the time to my colleagues.
Really takes a team, doesn't it?
Truly, it really does.
Yeah, I just saw someone say my son eats nothing but fries and goldfishes. That's a very common thing I hear. Everyone, if you're watching, comment down below like your child's safe foods. They're all very similar. Jacob's is kind of different though. Like he does like the snacks and like the savory foods, but he has expanded his diet and now he's really into tangy foods and like really strong tasting foods. So I guess he's on the other end of the sensory spectrum where it's like I want all the sensory input from that food, like mandarin, tuna, salami, like anything that's really strong, he loves.
That's actually I love that you bring that up because so kids on the spectrum, up to 90% of kids on the spectrum also have sensory processing disorder. And so that can basically, for those who may not know what that is, it's the way you interpret your senses from the outside to the inside. And you can be sensory seeking. You can also be sensory avoidant. And you can also be kind of some combination of all. And so a lot of times kids who are really selective in their eating, I see they may be sensory avoidant for most foods, but then very sensory seeking in the fact, like for this this mom who said he only eats fries and goldfish, that's crunchy. That's very crunchy, particular texture, particular color, and so very seeking toward a particular thing that might give him some sensory input too. So it's interesting when you start breaking down, okay, what are they eating and what is that telling us? What is their body seeking? And so, but I love that you bring that up because it does sound like your son is like seeking some of that like big input, and that may be calming too.
He likes crunchy too. Like, I think I've actually said this on my page before, like when talking about food, and because a lot of people ask me how I got Jacob out of that fussy period. I don't really know exactly how I did it, but it was mostly him probably. But it was really like when I did think about sensory processing and what types of foods he was eating, and were they crunchy, were they sweet, were they all those things, and then you really like, okay, what other foods can like be like that, and it was just adding those in, and it's cool to think of it that way. So the next question is the thing someone said, the thing with gluten, so I'm assuming
I know exactly what they mean. So everyone has the question, okay, so should my child be on a gluten-free diet? And everyone wants a simple answer of like, yes, all kids need to be on gluten-free diet, or like, no, that's totally crazy. There's no research to support it. The thing that's hard is there is some research to support it. There's also some research to say maybe not. So what I always say, and there's no one diet for everybody. And not only is that the case with autism, that's just the case for everyone. I mean, you could follow a specific diet and feel awesome, and I might follow the same diet and feel terrible. And so we really just have to listen to the individual. We have to listen to how, and for kids who might not be able to speak what they're feeling, they can show us how they're feeling in other ways. You might notice an improvement in focus, or that they are just calmer, that they're not grasping at their stomach, or that they're expanding their diet. And what I usually say, don't treat the gluten-free diet like a prerequisite, meaning that, like for nutrition, you don't have to go gluten-free right off the bat to see progress with nutrition. You can absolutely try it, but for kids who only eat, like for example, for that mom who said he only eats fries and goldfish, I would never say go on a gluten-free diet, because if you do, you're down to fries. And that's going to put you at more risk for nutritional issues. And so what we want to do is teach parents how to expand their child's diet, find the right resources to do that. And as we expand, find alternatives. And gradually you might be able to drop some of those foods that have gluten when you add more. But we don't want to subtract before we add.
Yeah. I've always heard about gluten. We've never done it with Jacob, like we're never gluten-free, but I've heard lots of stories of parents saying that their children's focus and their attention and their speech even improved when they went on a gluten-free diet. Is it also linked with like the constipation thing, or is that
totally can? Yeah, so food sensitivities are something that you have to take into consideration with constipation. Gluten's not the only one. Dairy I see all the time as well. And you're not wrong at all. I mean, I've worked with families who have gone gluten-free, and that's the only change they made and saw awesome progress. But then I've also seen people who have done it and are like, I've tried this for 6 months and I haven't really noticed any difference. And in that case, we're like, well, then if we can expand your child's diet back with gluten in it, okay. But that's where I'm like, we want to treat it as an individualized approach and do it when it's not going to put your child at a huge nutritional risk.
And I think it would be important to do it alongside like someone like you, a dietitian or something, so that, because I feel like for me it's scary to be like, oh, like I'd have to change all of his foods, most of his foods anyway, and that would be a big change for him, and that could really like push him back into a really limited diet. And I think just like get professional opinion before you try anything like that, I feel is my feeling.
You're totally right. And I will plug and say, not all dietitians are going to work in autism. In fact, most dietitians won't know much about autism, and that's
Mhm.
not their fault. It's just not an area that's really taught in school, which is very unfortunate. I didn't
Yeah.
say this in the beginning, but I have a brother on the spectrum, and so I grew up seeing his nutritional needs, seeing his really limited diet and how that affected him and his gut. And so I took that forward with me into my professional training and like learned to help families on the spectrum. And I feel like a lot of dietitians who do work with kids on the spectrum have some kind of personal connection because they see how important it is. But for
Yeah.
those who don't know much about autism or don't have a connection, they likely don't have any training in autism. So just putting that out there, that goes for any healthcare provider.
Mm.
But don't knock nutrition if you don't find a dietitian that is knowledgeable to support you through that,
Yeah.
because they just might not have the training.
It's such a shame because like it would be such a huge chunk of people that is like, food and yeah, anyway. That's just for
I
me to
agree.
hear perspective. Someone else talked about food sensitivities, which we probably also did there, with like dairy and gluten, they can all really affect.
Mhm.
Um, Someone said, how do I encourage my son to eat new foods? More of his safe foods, he will starve.
Yeah. So that goes alongside like not wanting to pull out his safe foods and just expect him to eat any foods because they may starve. They may literally not eat. And I've read case studies or I've heard of families who kids have ended up in the ER for malnutrition because we've tried to stick to the starved out method for so long, trying to make it work, and it just doesn't work. So I never say use that approach. We're never going to pull the safe food until if there was a medical reason for it or it was really non-nutritious and we got these new really nutritious foods in where we can rotate them in. And so what I do, I always like having a safe food on their plate. I never recommend feeding any meal or snack without any kind of safe food. And so on a new plate, there's actually a dietitian who I've learned a lot from who doesn't work in autism, but her name is Veggies and Virtue on Instagram. She's a wonderful resource. But she recommends for kids to have a like it, learning it, and love it food. And that really makes a lot of sense for autism too. So you always have a food you love, and that's the biggest portion size. Then you have a food you like 50% of the time. You have maybe a little bit smaller portion size. And then we have a learning it food. We're still learning to like this, and we have a very small amount on the plate. I
Yeah.
always stress, you think small, I mean smaller. We're going very small. And sometimes if it can't be on the plate yet, we move it to a learning plate where it's separate from the meal, but we can still talk about it and with the eventual goal to get it onto the plate and explore it further.
Yeah.
So, but my number one tip is just to always have a safe food available.
I like that idea of the three. I'm gonna try.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think it's a really good approach.
Yeah. Another question. Is there a particular food that may help autistic kids compared to non-autistic kids? I know someone just said something about that in the comments too. Like, is there a good food for autism? Yeah.
Yeah. So there's not one particular food that is just the perfect magic food that's going to make all kids feel great. It's more of a full diet that would really make the biggest difference. And that's for anybody. I mean, I could just, let's say I ate, Chick-fil-A and fried food all day and just added a little broccoli. Sure, that could be, I get a little extra nutrients, but that's not going to change my life. We really have to make bigger changes at this larger scale, and that takes time to get there. I tell all the families that I work with, I do not expect you to be perfect, but I expect us to make progress. I expect us to make little changes, and those little changes all add up. So what we're after is more of a whole food diet, and what I'm about to explain may feel really unattainable for some people, but know that it just takes time and the right approach to get there. So we work on more whole foods, more fruits, more veggies, more whole grains. And we can still eat processed foods. There are some that are better than others. There are some boxed foods that are going to have better ingredients than others. So we just work more on the quality of the diet and take steps forward. And I always say start good, better, best. So you don't have to go from a diet of chicken nuggets and french fries over to this like kale and what rainbow salad. That's not good expectations for you and can make you throw in the towel quickly. So maybe we take one step toward like an organic chicken nugget, and maybe that's the next step that we took. Maybe from there we tried some sweet potato fries and saw how that went, or like make these little changes so that we can get more and more nutritious as we take forward steps.
Yeah, that's awesome. I guess we'll just lead into your courses, because I think that's a perfect like layover like there, because we're all talking about getting expert, like professional opinion and help. A lot of the people that message me, particularly like, who do I go to? How do I get, a dietitian or a food, is it food therapy? I think it's called. I just wanted to hand it over to you if you wanted to talk about the course and everything like that.
Definitely. So I did create a course all about my approaches to help kids expand their diet. It's called Overcoming Picky Eating for Autism. So I teach families how to expand their child's diet, how to understand the steps to introduce new foods, which foods they should introduce first, what our goals are. I even talk supplements on how to fill in nutritional gaps if your child isn't eating right away, because supplements can be helpful. They're not going to take over for diet, but they can really help us get to those nutritional needs for your child. I basically go over everything that you need to know when it comes to picky eating, even eating out, vacations, school breaks, sickness, like if kids get sick and they're picky eaters afterward, what do we do from there? And so I cover that all in my online course. And so I realized as I was about to get on this, the enrollment closed yesterday, but I decided to just open it up just in case there happened to be even just one person on this live that was like, I really need help now, and I don't know where to go. So I opened enrollment up until, well, technically it'll be midnight my time, but I don't know what that is your time. Probably midday after, like evening.
In a couple of
Yeah, so I opened it back up, and the link's in my profile. And so if somebody did need additional support, and if nobody does, totally fine. But if just even one person out there is like, I've been looking for some kind of help, I just wanted to give the opportunity. So it is back up and rolling, and you actually get access to all of the materials for a year, but we run it live for 10 weeks so that I can support families through expanding their child's diet and going alongside the modules.
That's awesome. Someone just said, what is your handle? It's Autism Dietitian, isn't it?
Yes, I think at Autism Dietitian.
Is it up here or something like that?
It's always fun because it's hard. I don't want to click anything to mess it up. But yeah, if you tap the top, it should pop down and show both of our handles.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, if you guys are looking for even just tips, like your page is fantastic, and resources, and so definitely go and follow Britt, and then I will put in my Instagram stories your information for anyone that's rewatching the live. We have quite a few people that rewatch it, so I'll put the information in my stories. But thank you so much for joining my live.
Of course. I will share this on my page too. I think that, my whole audience would love this conversation as well. And thank you so much for having me. You're so easy to talk to. I love when lives just flow so easy. It makes it so easy. So thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thanks so much.
Bye.